Hello, Americans. I'm Kenton McNall. It's Constitution time. Today is December 18th, 2020. On January 6th, 2021, we'll take the last step in this very, very interesting and seemingly somewhat prolonged, but not really prolonged, presidential election. As with each of the other steps, many of them we just have never really had to pay attention to before. But it seems like we've got to pay extra attention to every single one of them now, because every one seems to be clothed in a little extra drama, a little extra, not quite the surety that we usually have that step will happen in the normal process. Now that the electors have been officially, formally certified by each and every state and their respective secretaries of state and their respective governors, it would seem that what is supposed to happen on January 6th, which is the opening and ratification of those certifications by the combined House and Senate, would be pretty straightforward. But already there are some rumblings that some shenanigans might take place. And in any case, here in Constitution time, it's an opportunity to learn what should happen. So we're going to take a little time to do that. It'll take me just a moment to convert over so I can introduce to you our panel this evening, and we're all going to discuss exactly that. What should happen and what might happen on January 6th. I'd like to say hello to our panel, which I will hereby dub the two Stevens. First, I'd like to welcome back to the show Mr. Stephen Stack, who has been with us many times as a friend of the show. And I'd also like to welcome for the first time Mr. Stephen Yu, who has been a friend for many years and also very successful business partner. Stephen, welcome to the show. Stephen Yu, that is. Please introduce yourself just a bit.
Hello, my name is Stephen Yu. I'm glad to be invited onto the show. I've been business partners with Ken for many years at Quolsville and ConnectWise, and also spent a lot of time gaming with him before that in Warcraft and some other fun games around that era. So we have a long history, and I am happy to come talk about electors today.
Wonderful. And Stephen Stack, again, welcome back to you. And I think our audience knows you pretty well.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. So, gentlemen, the subject today is the proceedings that will happen on January 6th, which I can only speak for myself among the three of us, but I have previously been only marginally aware of those proceedings. I don't recall cases where I had to or did pay any attention to it. But I'm paying attention to it now for the same reason I'm paying attention to every other aspect of this election, because there's doubt about every step. Mr. Yu, can you tell us what is supposed to happen on January 6th, minus any dramatics?
Sure, absolutely. So January 6th is actually already about 3 steps in the process. We had our election day in November, and then on December 14th, the slate of electors for each of the states was picked, either for Trump or for Biden. And so what's going to happen after that is that with the slates of electors certified by the state governors, a joint session is convened on January 6th at 1 p.m. That session is held in the House, so the senators go over there, but it's actually chaired by the president of the Senate. That happens to be Mike Pence, who's our vice president. So what Mike Pence, the president of the Senate, will do is he's going to open and present the certificates of electoral votes by each of the states and the District of Columbia. And then the House and Senate tellers will read each of the elector votes and count the results by announcing them. Once a majority of the whole number of electors appointed has been received by an individual candidate, this is under the 12th Amendment, a majority of the whole number of electors appointed, then that person becomes the president. And what happens is that as the Senate and the House tellers are opening these and tallying these votes, there can be a phase during which an objection can be raised. In order to raise an objection, the thing to note is that it must be a written objection, and it must be raised by both a member of the House of Representatives and a senator. So both a senator and a House rep must say, we object to one or more of these electors or electoral votes. And then the actual objection must be taken in and written. If there are one or more objections, the joint session is suspended. The Senate withdraws from the House chamber and returns to the Senate. Each are given a 2-hour window to discuss the objection, with any individual person having up to 5 minutes to talk about the objection. And the regular parliamentary procedures on how the House and Senate are run would allow the allocation of the time to talk. So basically, Mitch McConnell as the Senate Majority Leader and Pelosi as the House Majority Leader, Speaker of the House, will decide who gets to speak for and against during that time, with an hour basically allocated to both sides of the objection. At that time, the objection is voted on, and if there is an agreement to sustain the objection in both the Senate and the House, then that particular electoral vote is discarded.
I'm sorry, can you clarify that particular electoral vote for the state or an individual electoral vote?
That individual electoral vote is discarded. So you can object to one or more electoral votes, and they discuss it. You can discuss it at a state level, but you can also just discuss an individual elector, which has actually happened more than once in history, twice, I believe, where there was a faithless elector. And so they discussed objecting to and throwing out that faithless elector's vote.
Let me bookmark that. I want to back up to something you said earlier. You said that once a majority of the electoral votes have gone to one candidate or the other, that person is the president.
Correct.
When does 270 electoral votes come into the equation here?
So normally 270 is the number of electoral votes that are needed to win the presidency. That's because under our current vote allocation, there are 438 members of the House of Representatives and 100 senators. That together adds up to 538 electoral votes allocated to the states in proportion to their population, with 2 to each state for the senators. 270 is a majority of the 538 electoral votes. However, that's assuming that all 538 of the electors are appointed. The problem comes in, not really a problem, but the nuance comes in if not all 538 electors are appointed. So if, for instance, two of the electors, for whatever reason, had objections raised and were discarded, you would only need a majority of the 536 remaining appointed electors, meaning that there would really be 269 is the magic number at that point.
So you're saying in that case, let's say 10 electors get thrown out by this objection process, that 270 is no longer needed to become the president.
Correct. At that point, only 264 would be needed to be president.
Okay. So I am also very interested, though, in the fact that individual electors can be objected to, because this 2-hour debate that can happen times 50 objected to electors, if there's a senator and a representative to sponsor each one, that's a lot of time off the clock and off the calendar, is it not?
It is. So there has not actually been a precedent set for this, but at least in 1873, the last time this went for a long time, they allowed all the objections to be discussed in one 2-hour window. So that would not by itself delay the vote indefinitely.
So let's dive into that a little bit, the history of this process. Mr. Stecker, you brought up a few times in history that this has in fact happened, including fairly recently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in more modern-ish history, it's there's been two different objections that have needed to break out. So in 2004, Senator Boxer from California and Representative Jones from Cleveland brought up a objection to Ohio's electoral votes. That one didn't really go anywhere, but it did cause a 3-hour and 50-minute delay. So between time to move to each individual chamber and then to come back, ended up being about 3 hours and 50 minutes. And then in 1969, there was an objection to one specific elector, which was a faithless elector, raised by, I don't remember who, but it was raised by both the senator and a house, and they broke out and also decided that it would be not sustained. So in neither scenario were any votes discarded or anything like that. It hasn't been since you could say 1877, but that was just kind of a unique scenario in general. But that 1873 was the last time that there was actually a vote that was approved to reject votes from Arkansas and Louisiana, and then 3 of the electors from Georgia who had voted for a deceased candidate.
So this has not happened often, and no. Is it in any of those cases, was anything overturned or the decision of who should be president changed?
Other than in 77, which was just sort of arguable, it's never decided anything, never overturned any election. And for the most part, they aren't usually raised. So since 2000, we've had one in 2004, which did end up breaking out into a vote, and then 10 objections in 2016, but those were just by House members, so they did not go to a vote. They were
because
just
there was
noted.
No senator to co-sponsor it.
Yep.
I see. So, and by the way, Stephen, did you get all the way through the what's supposed to happen?
Yeah, so if we get through all the objections, which there were some objections during the description of it, once all the objections are rejected for whatever reason, then, or sustained, then the objections phase is done, that's when they take the vote. And once there is a majority, which usually is 270, then they declare this a candidate the next president. So that finishes that part.
So Mike Pence, the president of the Senate, will get to officially declare Joe Biden the next president.
Correct.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what could happen. Because as I've looked at this process, I do see areas that have never been stretched before procedurally, some that are not maybe quite as defined as they could be. And we do still have a very significant number of Republicans, congressmen, and senators who have not acknowledged that Mr. Biden is to be the next president. And the line I hear most often is, we have to let this play out. I know of no this except January 6th. So whether it was a serious attempt or just hooliganism, what might happen? And one thing I am focused on a little bit is the time that it takes to do these objections, because there is a finite number of hours between the 6th and the 20th. There's a finite number of days. And if each objection takes 4 hours, even if the joint sessions were working 16 hours a day, there is a number of objections that could take you into the 20th. So do either of you know of any rules that prevent, if a senator and a congressman have teamed up, or multiple congressmen, multiple senators, is there any rule that prevents them from one at a time objecting to electors, even if there's no real valid reason to do it? And if they did so, would they be able to have this separate meeting on every single one of them?
It would probably come down to how Pelosi and McConnell want to run the separate meetings. They might entertain the first handful of breakouts, but at a certain point, they may choose to kind of stack them all up and do them all at once, as they did in 73. And it would likely, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
It would just likely come down to communication.
One thing to keep in mind is that these objections can't just be raised for any reason. So while it is true you could individually raise an objection for every elector, in practice, not every one of them can be sustained. And that's because the statute actually doesn't say you can raise an objection. It actually says no electoral vote regularly given by electors whose appointment has been lawfully certified, but from which one return has not been received shall be rejected. So what that really means is it starts off as a negative. You cannot reject a certified by the governor and the state legislature elector who has basically given a regularly given vote, which is the phrasing that caught the faithless electors. But if it's just because there's a vote given for Biden, it doesn't matter. You can't then bring up like, oh, there's election fraud or there's, voting irregular. None of those matter. It only matters whether it's a regularly given vote, meaning the elector chose to give that vote to the person that they said they would, which by most state laws is necessary, and that the elector themselves were lawfully certified. We've already moved past the lawfully certified portion. It's too late to object to that because of something known as safe harbor, basically before December 14th. But go ahead.
Stephen Stack gave an example a little earlier where a lawfully given elector was in fact rejected by this process of, objection. So why was that one rejected?
So there's two parts to it from what I said. There is is the elector lawfully certified? That can be rejected if they're not. So that's if there was a slate of electors that were at odds between the governor and state legislatures. The other reason that they can object is the vote was not regularly given. That's the exact phrasing, regularly given. What in effect they were trying to argue was that a faithless elector, someone who said they would vote for Nixon but instead voted for someone else, like Kennedy, was not giving a regularly given vote, and that was the basis of the objection. They did not object on the basis that the elector was not lawfully certified, because they were lawfully certified, and that's why I'm saying. Oh, go ahead.
In 2004, Boxer's objection was that there were voting irregularities, and so the certification itself was unlawful, which they let play out, but I'm not convinced they would need to let play out.
I wonder who made the decision to let it play out. Would that have had to have been the Senate Majority Leader and the Speaker that let that play out? These are some of the, I'm not sure it's defined areas, and in the past it has counted on enough goodwill and cooperation between the leaders for these things to be handled appropriately. And if that's all we're counting on, that's a little more at risk at this point. Do you happen to know that, Mr. Stack?
I think it's either going to be up to McConnell and Pelosi as to if they want to allow it, or it will be up to Pence.
Ouch.
I'm not convinced that it's super well documented who decides.
But
whether,
it is a precedent.
I would think it's Pence.
That if the two can't agree, it's usually the chair that's going to make the call. So that raises some interesting possibilities.
But to be fair, the majority leader of the Senate has no actual authority. It's actually the president of the Senate, who is Mike Pence. So Mike Pence both chairs it and is the representative / leader of the Senate. McConnell is just there kind of as an honorary figure in determining procedure. It's actually Mike Pence who has the...
So are you saying, Stephen, that in these cases where they're going to agree on anything, that it's in fact Pence and Pelosi that will be agreeing, and McConnell's not even in that equation?
Yes, that's technically correct. And it's also the case that even the general running of the Senate, the majority leader does not actually have any vested power. It's the fact that the vice president has yielded, in effect, the normal procedural powers to the majority leader. And so that's, and again, this is a norm and a tradition, which usually means that it should be followed, but we live in strange times.
Well, we've talked about our friend historical norm, propping up the wall for the last few years. But I brought that up in a previous show because I think that the vice president could reassert their authority in the future as president of the Senate. That could be interesting, but a different conversation. So let's say that one way or another, because historical norms have been beat to death, and let's say that one way or another, they manage to object and object and object, and even though there's no electors thrown out because there's no agreement between the Senate and the House, let's say they just drag it out so far that we get all the way to January 20th. What happens then, Stephen Stack?
The 20th Amendment is pretty clear. On noon, January 20th, the president and vice president's terms shall end. If there's not a replacement, like president and vice president, then you follow the line of succession. So we have President Pelosi, assuming that she maintains her seat as the House Majority Leader, because there is some wiggle room there. But
when is that decided? Do you know?
The 3rd, I want to say, January 3rd, when the new House is seated, they could technically oust her if they really wanted to.
So we could have President Ocasio-Cortez if this happened on the 20th.
Yeah, it's possible. Unlikely, but possible.
Are there any other areas of this process on the 6th that, again, are reliant on historical norms or ill-defined procedures that just haven't been tested that you know of? I've seen some...
Not that I can think of. It's a pretty straightforward meeting. I mean, it's normally 25 to 30 minutes long.
Yeah, the time to object was probably a lot earlier if there was going to be a way to meaningfully overturn the election results. This is pretty much a formality, and even the non-formality portions of it are fairly well written out in the procedures and in the 12th Amendment. And so it's difficult, not impossible, obviously, for something super unexpected to happen that would prevent Biden from being our next president.
I have no such expectation, but I think it's been a very, very interesting exploration of this little backwater thing that happens so that our next president can be inaugurated on the 20th. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I hope to have you both back again very soon. This has been a really interesting conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks.
And thanks to all of you as well for joining us on Constitution Time, and we will see you again very soon. Take care, Americans. Good night.